Hi friends, Reverend Cole here from Selkirk United Church with a midweek message for August the 4th, 2021. Two things to share with you today. The first is just a reminder announcement that Cheryl Errol is celebrating her 80th birthday party in just a couple of days this Friday, August 6th at the church. And everyone is invited to do a drive-by greeting with Cheryl starting at 3 p.m. right in front of the church. I know she'd love to see some of her church friends there, so I hope you'll accept the invitation and head over to the church on Friday to wish Cheryl well on her big day. Starts at 3. The other thing I have to share with you today is a very interesting blog post from Dr. Diana Butler Bass on the future of the mainline church in the States. Mainline churches would include in the US churches like the Presbyterians, Methodists, Anglicans, Episcopalians, Lutherans, United Church of Christ, and in Canada, our United Church would, I'm sure, qualify as a mainline church. The author of the blog, Diana Butler Bass, is a multiple award-winning author and popular speaker, inspiring preacher, one of America's most trusted commentators on religion and contemporary spirituality. She holds a doctorate in religious studies from Duke University and is the author of, I think, 11 books now, including Christianity After Religion and Grounded, Finding God in the World, A Spiritual Revolution. I had the pleasure of seeing Dr. Butler Bass speak when she was in Winnipeg a few years ago. The title of her blog post for July 15th was Not Dead Yet, which certainly caught my eye. It's about whether there is a future for mainline churches in this day and age when we hear so many stories of churches struggling. Let me read some of her thoughts on the matter. Keep in mind she's writing from an American perspective and using American data, but there are definitely parallels to our Canadian context. Here's Diana's post. She writes, "In the early 1990s, I was a member of Trinity Episcopal Church in Santa Barbara, California. At the time, few people attended services in the nearly 700-seat neo-Gothic sanctuary. On a particular Sunday, an usher counted the people at worship, fewer than 60. It can't get much worse, she thought as she dusted cobwebs from the back pews. Pretty soon we'll be closed. Trinity didn't close. Through a remarkable set of circumstances, committed leaders, and hard work, the church came to life once again. In the 4 years in which I attended, Trinity grew from that 60 to over 300 and kept growing for the next several years. It is still a vibrant, vital congregation. How did this happen? Trinity broke all the conventional wisdom of church growth. They preached politics from the pulpit. They married gay members before marriage equality was legal in California. They went to protest marches. They innovated liturgy. They read liberal theology books, studied feminist and liberation theology, embraced contemporary biblical criticism. They followed no plan, except for believing that Christianity was an adventure and that Christian community could be transformative, challenging, and deeply spiritual in the world and for the world. In those days, most historians and sociologists of religion taught something called the Kelly thesis. Back in 1972, Dean M. Kelly wrote a book entitled Why Conservative Churches Are Growing, that suggested that conservative churches with strict boundaries and sect-like tendencies would always grow, while liberal churches that had accommodated to culture would always decline. For the 2 decades following his book, as mainline numbers sank and evangelical churches flourished, Kelly seemed right. In the minds of most observers of American religion, Kelly's thesis, Why Conservative Churches Are Growing, had become a statement of fact. Only conservative churches can grow. When people repeat this mantra, they probably don't know where it originated. It has become a cultural commonplace. Trinity declined. It almost closed, but then it didn't. In 1994, I wrote about it in the local newspaper, says Butler Bass. And since then, I've written about how wrong-headed the Kelly thesis is, suggesting that there would come a time when evangelical churches would go into a demographic tailspin. I optimistically hoped that the pendulum of conservative and liberal Protestantism might swing at least a little in the direction of mainline churches again, because it really isn't about conservative and liberal. Christianity in America involves a host of complex concerns about generational shifts, political issues, cultural tastes, and most of all, the ever-present spiritual wandering of a people shaped by religious experience and a nomadic soul. But even 2 decades after Trinity, in which time I've written countless columns, 11 books, and delivered thousands of lectures and sermons on these subjects, I was surprised by a tweet on July 8th from Natalie Jackson of Public Religion Research Institute. Jackson showed a couple of graphs depicting church-going trends. Among other things, the graphs showed that in 2016, white mainline Protestants sank to their all-time low as a percentage of the American population, 12.8% identified as white mainline Protestants. In the 4 years following that, the numbers started ticking up, reaching 16.4% now, the highest percentage since 2009. At the same time, the percentage of people who identify as white evangelicals has been sinking in an astonishing fall from 23% in 2006 to 14.5% now. Butler Bass continues, saying, I don't have the exact numbers at hand, but I am fairly certain that there hasn't been a time since 1980 when the percentage of white mainline Protestants in the general population was higher than the percentage of white evangelicals. That's at least 4 decades, maybe longer. But this is a genuine shift away from white evangelicalism toward mainline Protestantism. On July 8th, 2021, shortly before its 50th birthday, the Kelly thesis died. Good riddance, I say. So now what? It is reasonable to assume that a certain percentage of former white evangelicals are making their way toward white mainline churches, and it is important to be clear about what is going on regarding this shift. First, people are leaving white evangelicalism for a host of political, social, and theological reasons. Some of the best research suggests that people are leaving conservative churches because they don't believe what those communities teach any longer. Believe is a fluid word here. Leavers may still believe, for example, in the Trinity or the virgin birth, but they don't believe that Trump was ordained by God to be president, or that LGBTQ people are lesser, or that women should submit to their husbands. Or they may not believe the Bible is true and may be struggling with fairly conventional views of race. For some reason of belief, however, they increasingly felt outside of evangelical communities. Their relationships strained, and they made a difficult decision to walk away. Many of those leaving evangelicalism are steeped in conservative theologies and know the Bible well. They are often sad, angry, and wounded, and perhaps tentative about participating in new churches. They are used to particular styles of worship, lay involvement, and church offerings, simple things like decent parking lots and babysitting for kids, and may find even the most welcoming and inclusive mainline churches lacking in such things. Second, trends aren't destiny. Just because this is happening now doesn't mean it is going to happen forever or even for the next decade. It could be that the mainline is a way station for people who will eventually leave Christianity altogether. But there's no knowing that. People in mainline churches should understand that 4 years of growth does not validate everything that the denomination does or every custom or practice in a particular congregation. This is a moment to listen well to those who may be coming your way. For heaven's sake, don't ever tell a newcomer, we don't do it that way, or don't sit here, that's my pew. This shift is occurring in large part because evangelical churches have failed, not necessarily because mainline churches are doing everything right. Hubris is not the right response to the data, but self-reflection is. Third, says Butler Bass, share your story with wisdom, grace, humility, and hospitality. When a major religious shift is underway, there's nothing more important than to tell your story. The people who are brave enough to walk in your doors or spend time reading your website can't read your mind and don't remember the former pastor or the beloved member who died 20 years ago. They don't want to know when the building was renovated or who donated the windows. Your story isn't a timeline. It is about the spirit of community, what motivates you, where you find meaning, your hopes and fears and gifts. Mainline churchgoers generally assume simple things like infant baptism, the flow of the Christian year, and written liturgy and lectionaries. They know multiple verses of old-fashioned hymns like classical music and can tell the difference between a Calvinist and a Wesleyan. Not sure about that one. Mainliners also regard private religious experience pretty highly, don't wear their faith on their sleeves, know lots of stuff about capital campaigns, bad sound systems, and broken air conditioners, and really like helping people. Oh, and funerals. Mainline churches do those well. In short, mainliners live inside a particular history, are shaped by poetic words, remember the value of quiet faith and thoughtful reflection, show God through the works of one's hands more than in words, and understand failure and death. In other words, the practice of mainline Christianity is not always, but in large part, different than the assumed practices of most of American evangelicalism. Mainline types need to be prepared to explain that, all of it, to newcomers. Assume nothing, and be prepared to laugh and learn a few things about yourself in the process of knowing and telling your story. Over the next few weeks and months, there will be much more to write, she says, many arguments to be had and challenges to be faced in regard to this shift. There will be a conversation about labels and what counts as mainline and whether or not the emergent church movement had an impact on all this. There will be important theological and social engagement with how race and racism has played in the shift and how it will play out in the future. Despite all the unanswered questions, the implications of the shift couldn't be more important for politics, social issues, and culture, as well as the future of Christianity in America in a post-Christian age. But right now, it is enough to know you are living in history. A really important moment is here. The story of an old religious tradition hasn't ended the way critics once thought. Paraphrasing the words of the old Monty Python sketch, we're not dead yet. We've just been awaiting resurrection. That was from Dr. Diana Butler Bass. Some very interesting thoughts on the nature of the changing church and our future. I'd love to hear your thoughts and comments about any and all of what she had to say. Again, keep in mind her American context, and I'm not sure if anything similar is happening or will happen here in Canada, but it is interesting to think about what's next for Christianity in general and for our church in particular. Let's keep listening to God's voice, leading us on into our future, and living out the good news that Jesus lived and taught. And I think our church will be just fine. That's all for this week, friends. I hope you're staying safe and well. I'll see you next time. Bye for now.